Hi everyone, my name is Dan and I'm here today with the director of the film An Invocation to the Earth, Yeo Siew Hua, and we are here in the secondary rainforest of Gilman Barracks. It used to be a plantation of Gambia, amongst other things, before it was converted into a military barracks, and as of in recent years it's been converted to an arts cluster called Gilman Barracks. You may also recognize this from the film itself. It's where you shot this about a year ago to this day. So would you like to tell us the whole process of An Invocation to the Earth? Because I understand there was a earlier iteration of it. How did it come about? How did it evolve? And why this location?
Right. Thanks, Dan. So just to explain a little bit why we are here, and we'll have to apologize on maybe sweating it out as we talk, and also maybe the sound with that you're gonna hear, which is the forest itself. And we're here because the film was shot entirely in this area. Yep. You might also recognize the tree that the character was sleeping on, which is this. At that point of time, I was working on a theatre project called The Year of No Return, and this has a very strong message about the climate crisis and what we are doing to the earth, right? So I think I was kind of inundating myself with a lot of the research, the material, reading a lot more about the topic, and so maybe there was no other headspace for me to think about anything else, so I thought, okay, maybe I also then make a film about this, right? Which then, one thing led to another. The film turned out something of a dance movement choreographic work, that is situated in a forest, and I guess I come back to this forest because here is where I'm familiar with this space. And so that's why we are here. This film deals not only with the kind of climate issues that we're facing very intensely at this point of time in our history, but also because during that moment when I was shooting this work, it was also during the lunar calendar, the 7th month of the lunar calendar, which is the Hungry Ghost Festival. It's a festival that we celebrate here, and so I think the elements of a certain kind of spiritual nature gets also worked into this work. Because there was a lot of if you go around, there's a lot of people burning offerings, effigies, and this festival is actually, in a nutshell, it is actually when the gates of hell opens and the spirits come back to our world. So this would also include your ancestors, and basically people who have passed away from recent and also from long time ago, right? So you would see a lot of people burning offerings. It's quite interesting that actually also this idea of burning offerings, because especially in recent times, these offerings that you see getting burned, they become more and more sophisticated, right? Maybe it's growing with the times. There is like how people are starting to burn like cars, for their ancestors. So they would create these kind of paper models of like cars, and you would even see how there are cars which are more updated to the recent models. not only are people burning like new technological devices like their phone, like iPhones and stuff, they're also burning like instructional manuals on how to use them. So I think culturally itself is quite interesting, our relationship with like the material that we are burning.
So the belief is that these the ashes of the offerings or the effigies
Yeah.
Ascend and go up
Yeah.
into the world of our
Yeah.
ancestors
Yeah.
and
Yeah. Yeah.
to appease them in a sense, right?
To appease them, to favor them. I mean, more often than not, you also have people burning to get favors, for example. Yeah. So there's a certain kind of strange transactional relationship. More often than not, of course, we are burning money. Yeah? There is this kind of like paper, we call them hell notes, that we will burn, and they would supposedly receive it. No? Yeah, and they would be happy, right? Yeah. So I think a lot of this burning that I was seeing out on the streets is out in the open, and also in the temples you would see it everywhere. So as I was like developing my work, this work, even at home as I was like writing it, I could smell wafts of like the smoke and of the burnings along on the streets that kind of come into the house. So it was actually filling me up everywhere, you know, and I think that kind of worked into the film. You also, yes, I think rightly so, you also pointed out that there is a certain kind of performative element to this festival. Yeah. And basically what happens is that aside from just burning the offerings, there is also a lot of performances that are that people make as an offering to entertain the spirits who return, right? So famously, as in the Chinese cultural communities, you would see them staging these. They call it like a getai, which is like a where performers would go up and sing and dance. Sometimes to no audience at all, no human audience at all. Sometimes, right? Of course, you could also come to join and watch the performance, right? But its main functionality is so that it's performing for the dead or those who have passed.
Besides the Hungry Ghost Festival, also I noticed how in this work you layer it with different forms of spirituality or mythology. Would you like to talk about how in the beginning of the film, for example, we see this incantation or this spell? How did that come about, and why do you decide to kind of layer it with a myth from a different culture?
Right. Yes. Yeah. So talking about the kind of spiritual aspects of the film. I mean, for one, I myself am also someone who you can call practice certain kind of spiritualities. Maybe not so institutional type of religions, but for me now it's like how do I capture that into the film. But basically, because already, as I was saying, that we were making this film during the Ghost Festival, the Hungry Ghost Festival. But at the same time, I myself am very syncretic. I think maybe one thing that to know about our society here, right, is that it is very syncretic. No, don't you agree that we have a lot of customs and even our religions? There is an overlap on a lot of things, and I think for me, it has already been kind of a lifelong work that I've been doing that really fuses in my own experiences as I'm growing up, because there are a lot of myths, a lot of folklore, a lot of spirituality that shapes who I am, my identity of who I am. And these are not just purely coming from my family background, which is Chinese, right? So in this work, you would see a lot of maybe in a shorthand we would call it Malay magic, which is practiced quite commonly here also. Yeah. And here's something maybe very interesting that I had picked up on, which is that in a lot of these you can call them practices, both from the different cultural rituals, that you see a lot of spirit possession. Yeah. So this idea of spirit possession, we see it very often during the festival, the Hungry Ghost Festival, but also in a lot of the rituals that the Malay magic community practices. Yeah. So I think it's very common for us to be thinking that there are spirits amongst us, sometimes broadly understood as a certain kind of animism, yeah, but that these spirits have a very real engagement with our existence here, no? And sometimes we even invite the spirits to possess us, yeah, through certain ritualizations. I think from maybe a more institutional point of the religion, it might be a little bit shied away upon, or to be seen a little bit negative sometimes, but actually as customary practices, it is very common, and it is not seen in such a terrible light, because there is a lot, I guess, from us to learn, that is passed down through this kind of like possessions. Actually, it's quite interesting, because I think someone who is very interested in a certain kind of bodily transmission of knowledge, right? A very bodily transmission of understanding of the world, that is passed down maybe generationally or culturally, that maybe isn't suffice when it is written just as a book. It has to be felt in a very bodily sense. And I think these kind of spirit possessions are in some ways a certain kind of transmission. You might not understand it on a very rational kind of level, but when possessed, you feel the strength. You feel the know-how. Importantly, the know-how is like very often times we see the person getting possessed, and all of a sudden he or she is able to jump on walls and like do quite fantastic moves, whether is it piercing of the bodies, our ability to sustain pain, and our ability to express pleasure. All these things starts to transform in a very radical and very fascinating way.
So it's interesting to me how in An Invocation to the Earth, in those very evocative spells that were written by your collaborator Zarina Muhammad, the artist, religious figures such as Batara Guru or Fatima are mentioned.
Yeah.
But as the film plays out, your two main characters seem to be possessed by the folklore of Sang Kachil,
Yes.
the mouse deer, the trickster mouse deer. Would you like to share more about how, the significance of Sang Kachil to you, and how you see it playing out in this film?
Yeah. I guess it's important that we talk a little bit about, which is kind of a main motif, right, in this work, Sang Kachil, which means Mr. Mouse Deer, Mr. Deer, and also the Buaya, which is the crocodile. So in this work there is the interplay of, well, how should we call it, like a dominance or competition of wit, right, between the two characters of the mouse deer and the crocodile. And this is something that directly comes from a very, very prolific folklore here, prevalent folklore here in this region, not just in Singapore. I think, of course, it probably originated from either Malaysia or Indonesia because of the language that we know it to be. Yeah. But interestingly, also, as I was working through this film, I realized that how this folklore is also found in Philippines. It's also found in Vietnam. I mean, Singapore, of course, is something that I read, that we were taught in schools when I was in primary school, right, in Singapore. So it's interesting, this folklore that has traveled, in the region and intersects in this kind of way. But maybe very briefly, what the story of this folklore is that there is this mouse deer who is trying to cross a river, yeah, and this river, he can't cross this river. He wants to cross this river to eat fruits and stuff, and he meets this crocodile who obviously wants to eat the mouse deer, right? So the mouse deer, being a really small, almost defenseless animal, needs to figure out a way to cross the river, and so it becomes a game of wit. Yeah. So the mouse deer and the buaya is only one of the many stories where Sang Kancil uses his wit to, you can say, get his way. Yeah. But in this particular episode with the buaya, the Sang Kancil basically tricks the crocodile. I think in the original story, the mouse deer says that, like, the king of the forest wants to do a census of some sort. He wants to count how many crocodiles are there. Can you call all your family members to come and do a head count? No? Yeah. And so the crocodile comes, and they form a line, and so Sang Kancil starts counting them. But by the time Sang Kancil finishes his head count, he manages to cross the river, and the crocodile doesn't get to have his meal, right? Yeah. So it's always a certain kind of like a moral messaging at the end, that, like, as someone who's small and defenseless, you can use your wit to outwit the bigger, stronger competition, right? Which actually, if you think about it, this kind of idea is as an idea, it's really something that Singapore and our society really thrives on. It's like, I treat these folklores very similarly as our spiritual fabric here. They kind of infuse into each other very easily. A lot of the local customary folklore gets appropriated into our mainstream, like our religions.
So when it comes to applying this story of the Sang Kancil to the context of the climate crisis, I was intrigued by your very playful use of that electronic interference that we hear, and then a kind of call between the two characters of the mouse deer and the crocodile. So how did you choose to approach this quite all-consuming and huge topic of the climate crisis?
I think firstly, I would say that, I was trying to engage my work with the topic of the climate collapsing, and this is, of course, a very big topic, which, as an artist, sometimes it's very hard to grapple with. It's also true that I wasn't making a work that is maybe calling direct action to recycle or to divest from big corporations which are destroying our climate, right? But for me, I guess it comes from a very personal space, as I was explaining to you, that I think it's seen as more of a personal response, because I think I was talking about how this film was made during the Hungry Ghost Festival, and how I was experiencing a lot of burning, right? The effigies and the paper offerings and all these things that were like burning in a way that it really, wherever you go, you smell it. You smell the burning, and you know, okay, this is the Hungry Ghost Festival has arrived, because you smell the burning everywhere. Yeah. But what was also happening at that point of time, I remember very clearly, was that there were, in 2019, particularly, I mean, actually it has been happening a lot, but I think it struck me very strongly last year that the Amazon was burning. I don't know if you remember this episode. I think it's very widely shared online, on social media. What you see a lot of kind of like the very like terrifying images of the Amazon burning in a, not in a small way, right? It was going on for a long time. They couldn't quell the fire, and it was spreading, and it was really destructive to our, you know, to our natural environment. On top of that, we have been so concerned about the collapse of our climate. So I think these kind of images of the burning rainforest had struck me in a very intense way, on a very personal level. But there was another thing that was going on, because the more famous thing was the burning of the rainforest, but maybe it overshadowed another topic, which was also the burning of another very big rainforest in Indonesia. Yeah, maybe less famous, right? But a lot closer to home. That was hitting me a lot closer to home. So here I am making a work about the climate, about the burning of offerings and effigies to spirits, but meanwhile the very strong images that was coming out of, you know, social media and being shared around, of the burning of rainforests, both in the Amazon and also in Indonesia. So I think it was just hitting me in a very strong way, and that's why I think for me it was a way to really deal with I won't say it was that I was falling into some kind of depression, but it was very harrowing, like that whole experience, feeding yourself with these images. It was very harrowing, and I sought out a way to respond to it in the film. Yeah. There is a lot of fear. No, there's a lot of fear in my works. A lot of my works are about translating certain fears, certain very primal fears, very bodily fears, into the work, and I guess this is how it weaved into my film. And then compounding to all these fears was something that was going on also in the region. I mean, 2019 and 2020, very eventful years. I'm sure you can agree. That there were a lot of people who were concerned about the collapse of the climate, but were being oppressed. Yeah. And so what I'm talking about is activists in the region and also in Singapore, that because of their speaking out, because of their resistance, because of their dissidence, that they are that bad things happen to them, right? So as I was doing my research also, the number really struck me that in the Philippines, since 2016, the new government administration that came into power, the amount of like climate activists or environmental defenders skyrocketed, that were killed, that literally killed. It wasn't just that they were being stopped or criminalized, which happens a lot more in the region, but in the Philippines, they were literally being killed, and then on top of that, with impunity. So the government really didn't try to seek justice for them, which also meant that all the land grabbing big corporations, all the people who were mining for resources, they really had a free hand in making a lot of trouble for the activists, and also endangering their lives. So I think a lot of this work became about that. Maybe it started off about my response to the climate and my fears, and how I'm seeing the fires that we are creating and engulfing all that we love. But at the same time, it really became also about a response to what is happening to ecological dissidents and activism in the region, particularly in the Philippines. Yeah.
Which brings me to that final sequence in your film, that tableau of names and abstract faces of the fallen environmental defenders in the Philippines. Do you, when you chose to include that, did you mean it as a kind of a spotlighting of situation, as a resurrection of the ghosts? Because we also have the element of the facial recognition. We see the kind of constellation of their faces. What was the intention with that final sequence?
Right. So I'm glad you brought up this idea of a certain kind of resurrection, right? Because again, tying back to this idea of the Hungry Ghost Festival, when the gates of hell is opened up. Well, we call it hell, but actually it's just the underworld. No? Yeah, the gates of the underworld has opened up, and basically all the spirits are flocking back to our space, and that is a calling, right? That is a certain kind of like resurrection moment for us. Yeah. And this for me, I've always felt it very strongly. I think this idea of resurrection, yes, I think in presenting a work that is a performance, that is an offering, it pays tribute, I think. For one, it really pays tribute to the kind of courage and activism that has been going on, and particularly I think I felt so strongly about the people who were killed in the Philippines, that I also highlighted them in their names, the year of death, in a much more foregrounded manner. But I think for me also the idea of resurrection, as we were talking about, this idea of spirit possession was very strong for me. Like, just to call back the spirits is maybe the first step, but what can we glean from, what can we take from that, right? It's really a certain kind of like possession. Can they come back to possess us in some form or manner, right? Can those who have died come back to possess us in spirit, in form, in matter, in material, in whatever ways, in just an idea, to come back to repossess us with their courage to speak up and to speak out and to resist when we need to. So I think these are definitely ideas that was that really came to mind when I was creating this work, and also that final, we call it the tableau of ghosts and spirits coming. I think it was very important for me also to create that sense that when you start seeing the ghosts appearing, you also start understanding that they are always already in our midst, right? Maybe in that realm of the invisible, we don't engage with it immediately, in a more direct way, but it is a reminder that they are always in our midst. They are always watching over us, for better or worse. We might be very creeped out with this idea of spirits in our midst, and so we bracket them out. But I mean, the whole idea is also that they are here, and that they have to, we have to be kept accountable. Like, someone is always watching, right? Yeah. Yeah, and so what if you understand that they are back, they're watching us, they're coming back to bear witness to a dying earth, the dying earth that they were fighting for and that they lost their lives for, right? Like, what can we, the living, still come back to do and contribute? I think that this is a very strong idea for me to resurrect. But also, I think, interestingly, as you pointed out, there is this kind of facial recognition, right, as we call it in a shorthand, uh, using technology, right? Because I was saying they exist in this kind of invisible, imperceptible realm that maybe it's easy for us to look away. So how do I represent them, right, in our midst? And I was thinking, this is something that I've also been working on, this idea of surveillance and new technologies that's used to surveillance us, right? So I mean, at the moment now it's so much stronger because of the situation of the pandemic, right? Yeah, but this has always been going on, and in Singapore it is no, we don't need to deny this. I think the technology has been used in a very strong way as a surveillance tool, again, for better or worse, okay, in the way we regulate this country, right, or govern this country. Yeah, and for me is to how do I use this technology to represent the form of the ghost that's coming back to us in a very speculative way, of course, right? That we're saying, yeah, what if our technology has so far, gone beyond our human possibilities of seeing the invisible realm, and now through biometric facial mapping that we are able to actually perceive what we cannot see. This idea of using technology to perceive things that we cannot see with our human eyes has already been used in our sciences for the longest time, right? Why, it is not so far a reach for me to try to speculate a possibility like this. But I think it's also very important to say that I was trying to subvert this tool of surveillance, because more often than not it is used in a very, very big way, especially in the region, of using surveillance technologies to quell activism and dissent. We see this a lot in the activism in the region, yeah, in Asia. And for me now, it's like, how do I, reclaim technology? Because I'm not someone to say that we need to stop using all technologies already, right? But how do we try to recontextualize and reclaim back these kind of tools to say, okay, how do I subvert this, to make this point in my work, Yeah, what if we could use it to see the ghost around us? Would we want to?
So there's also this note when we're talking about the Filipino environmental defenders, of the strong link with the Philippines in your work.
Right.
In terms of one of the voiceover for the spells being in Tagalog, and also I understand one of your casts is half Filipino. Do you want to talk a bit about your selection of these collaborators, and since we're on that, also the element of dance and then bodily possession, as you earlier mentioned, how does that play out here?
Right. So thanks for pointing this out. That there are a lot of I guess you call it Filipino, elements in my film, because I am dealing with this topic that has very direct implications to the Philippines. That I've always also wanted to work with Chloe Shatrani, the dancer who plays Kancil, the mouse deer. Yeah, so she's half Filipino, and I've always thought that her practice. She's a dancer, she's a choreographer, she's herself an activist, but her practice is also very rooted in nature, in also that kind of the spiritual sense of nature. You see this a lot in her works, yeah. And for me, I really wanted to tap into this source in her for this work, yeah. And also as you pointed out, the Tagalog incantation, the spells that you hear. So the spells that you hear, some people might not recognize. A lot of it is in Malay, which is spoken by Zarina, the person who wrote the spells. So Zarina is also an art practitioner herself, but also she writes spells. She practices a lot of magic, yeah. And so I worked with her on creating a spell of resurrection. So the spell that you're hearing, it is not just is not just lifted out from just some text, but neither is it something that I wrote it myself willy-nilly, but it's something that we worked together to create a spell that has potency because of the language that was used in the spell. It is definitely a language that is known to the practice and the ritual and also the spirits themselves. So these spells are, so yeah, it really was a spell to bring back the spirits to come to our midst, right? And that actually is the form of what the whole work is, even if you ignore the message and the story of it. But basically it is for me to try to resurrect the spirits in a very real way to possess my dancers. Again, this idea is not so far-fetched from the practices that we have here, at least in Southeast Asia, that we do certain practices to bring spirits to, it's like some kind of muse relationship to repossess our dancers. Yeah, you see this in gamelan, in a lot of our traditional dances. A lot of our traditional performances. It has a lot of ideas of how do we bring back the muse of dance and the spirits who know how to use their bodies to explain, to use their bodies to activate, right? Yeah. And so this is in that similar frame of practice that I'm asking the spirits to come back to repossess my dancers, yeah, to do this work. On top of that, both, not just Chloe Shotrani but also Kai. Yeah. So Kai herself is a brilliant choreographer who worked with me very closely in creating the choreography of this work, and herself is also does a lot of contact improv, yeah, which I was feeling like this work is what I wanted to explore a lot. Dance in a very gestural kind of way, but also to bring in the kind of contact improv movements. Yeah, because it is a dance about two, and it is a dance about dominance and wit that has a very that is being portrayed in a very bodily sense. And so this idea of that contact improv, which Kai herself is very familiar with, brought to the table, and how we work this thing out. Because I myself I'm not a dancer, no, I'm not a choreographer, so I had to work closely with them to work this movement piece out, that also kind of links back to maybe the story at work, right? And also this two being engaged in a very old vendetta that got resurrected in the process of this spell, to continue their trivial fighting, only to realize that the forest is burning. They're now covered in smoke. when I was shooting during September and August, actually this is also the period where you experience a lot of haze in Singapore, a lot of smoke that's coming in to Singapore, and actually this is from Indonesia when they are clearing up the forests and the crops and plantations, yeah, and they will burn the plantations to sort of refertilize the land, but a lot of this smoke isn't just contained in Indonesia. It really wafts over to Singapore, to Malaysia, and even as far out to Philippines, right? Yeah. So this idea that like our country is like by itself, or we have national boundaries like this, really starts to fail when we really think about the climate, right? Yeah, that the fire from another country, another nation, is also the problem of somewhere else, right? Yeah. And when the nature collapses and fails, all of us fail, right? Yeah.